The Knights Templar remain one of the most intriguing and fascinating chapters of medieval history. They came and went, in historical terms, in the blink of an eye. From their formation here in France in the early 12th century, they were only on the scene for just under 200 years. So who were they? What did they do? And why are there still rumours that circle around them of hidden treasure, weird rituals, and satanic practices?
While they were supposed to be, fighting the Crusades, some of them would engage in things that were far from Christian, much more pagan.
They worship ahead of John the Baptist. You spit and urinate on the cross and you deny Christ. It's really bizarre. It's very dark.
There are immense rumours of their dark arts and their dark practices. For a religious order that was part of the Catholic Church that defended Christendom, that's extraordinary.
The Knights Templar were warrior monks. They were the most powerful organisation in Europe.
They were corrupt, avaricious, religious people that realised that there was an awful lot of treasure hidden somewhere in Jerusalem.
The Knights Templar were on a relic quest. They're there to find treasure. By all accounts, they succeeded.
This is Gisors Castle in France, about 2 hours north of Paris. And it was here, at a tree, very much like this one, that the whole Knights Templar story is said to have begun over 900 years ago. Now, according to the legend, a group of French knights gathered here in 1118 and split a large elm tree in half before they all made solemn vows to God to help pilgrims in the Holy Land. And whether or not this was true, well, to be honest, no one really knows. But we do know that around 20 knights did go to Jerusalem a year later to do just that. The order's full name was the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. And it was led by Hugh de Payens, a French nobleman from the Champagne region.
Pilgrimage had started in the Middle Ages, had become popular. The First Crusade had taken parts of Jerusalem. But they were finding that the pilgrims were being robbed en route. So a small band of knights were formed and they were sent to the Holy Land to protect the pilgrims. When they arrived, they took up residence in what was thought to be the original Temple of Solomon.
They were like a cross between three things. First, they were the Navy SEALs or the SAS. They were crack elite troops of their age. Second, they were masters of finance. They were like the Goldman Sachs of the period. And third, they were a unique and committed religious group, like Opus Dei, of lay people. So you bring those three together, and it's something that only the medieval world could have created.
The extraordinary thing about the Templars is that they start off as this very, very small guard that's just there to protect pilgrims in the Holy Land. But what they then become, over the years, is this incredible, almost the first kind of pan-national globalized corporation, if you like. I mean, it's the most extraordinary powerful institution. So the big question is, how do we go from that very small band of supposedly charitable knights to this enormous, unaccountable, incredibly wealthy, globalized institution?
They were supposedly there doing securities for pilgrims. That was their credibility. And I'm sure they did. They were knights, they were fighting men. And I think they'd got two intentions. Yeah, we're supposedly doing it for free to protect all the pilgrims, but we could do with some payment. And it was hopefully lying somewhere underneath King Solomon's temple.
Why are they put up in places of very important sort of religious significance with a lot of relics that they can have access to? Why are they staying around King Solomon's mines? Why are they why are those areas so important? So were they there to kind of bring back things of note that actually didn't belong to them at all? And that's been one of the kind of core themes that's been around for a long time when you read about the Templars.
The Knights Templar knew that Jerusalem was under siege for many, many centuries. And so what I think is that they found an inventory list. The Copper Scrolls tells you where all the gold is hidden. But was there another list that tells you where all the relics are hidden? Ark of the Covenant is over there. Menorah is over there. They must have. It's a labyrinth of tunnels beneath where they are staying in Jerusalem. It would have taken them decades to find what they found. They must have found something that helped them do it quickly.
So how come these fearless protectors of Christian values develop this reputation for occult practices?
Well, I mean, the Templars were always a secret society. And as time wore on, of course, there were people who left that secret society for one or other reason, and they were eventually shopped by a couple of disgruntled ex-Templars who then made the accusations that have become famous to us of idolatry, of heresy, of sodomy, of illicit practices, of occult practices. So, I mean, at the milder end, it was denouncing Christ. It was even said that the Grand Master had to denounce Christ at his induction as Grand Master. But then it gets racier and racier. So then we have accusations, for example, that there were illicit kisses, as they described it, in their initiation ceremonies for the knights, which was kissing at the base of the spine, on the navel, and on the mouth. Also that they worshipped a head, and that head was sometimes a cat's head. It was sometimes the head of John the Baptist. It was sometimes a three-faced head. It's sometimes a head in the sand. Sometimes his head spoke to them. There were different variations on that. So there were a whole stream of very steamy accusations.
When you read about some of the things that they did, it was sort of very masculine, almost like a fraternity, So there's a lot of, men together, a lot of sort of pent up, testosterone. So you can imagine in those moments where they're winding down, what it turns into is probably something far from the Christian message that they were trying to spread.
Do you understand what you must do?
Yes, Master.
All praise Baphomet.
All praise Baphomet.
The rituals that we understand the Knights Templar did, especially their initiation ritual, is really bizarre. It's very dark. The initiate swears to become a slave to the order. There's rumors of homosexuality, and you spit and urinate on the cross, and you deny Christ. So either one, this is a test. The test that initiates metal, if they still want to be a Knights Templar after they've experienced all this, or it's just simply how dark they really are.
What's remarkable is that the actual cell that held Jacques de Molay and the other Templar prisoners is still intact today here within Gisors Castle. And a local historian and guide, Marie, has agreed to show me around.
Come on, Jamie, follow me in the tower.
Wow. So was Jacques de Molay held in here?
Be patient. I will show you some more. It seems because of an ancient text which tells us that Jacques de Molay was in Gisors before to go in Paris.
And what was Jacques de Molay accused of?
Oh, there were a lot of charges. The principal was heresy.
Get him down.
Kneel before the true Christ and recant your sins.
Gisors Castle plays a huge part in the story of the Templars, and legend has it that all manner of black magic and debauchery took place in that castle, and there are supposedly etchings and pentagrams and witchcraft and Satanism going on in there. But the real reason that it plays a big part in their history is the fact that their Grand Master, the last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was imprisoned in that castle in a dark, dank dungeon, was tortured there, and was then burnt at the stake.
An amazing room. So we know that Jacques de Molay was held here at Gisors Castle. We just don't know where.
Yes. It seems because of this ancient text. But I have to show you another room. Very interesting.
Oh, right. It goes on.
Follow me.
Okay. Oh, mind your head. Wow. So is this sort of like a prison cell down here?
Yes, it's a possibility. A prisoner could have made this graffiti on the wall.
So these carvings were done by prisoners, is that right?
Yes, perhaps.
And what do they depict? What are these scenes?
It's scenes of the Christ life.
Right.
You can see the scene here, and another scene here, very rare, like the hanging of Judah.
So these are all scenes from the Bible that were carved out by prisoners who were held here, is that right?
Here, yes.
Incredibly, there are these images on the cell walls that appear to be some intentional form of storytelling. Is this Jacques de Molay trying to say, here is the truth, here's the real story, here is what we knew, I'm about to die, so I'm going to preserve it for you here on these walls? We don't know. It's still there today, and that makes it a really fascinating element of the mystery.
The Templars as an organisation were in the Holy Land for over 200 years, so they would have come into contact with other religions, other beliefs. They were definitely in touch with the assassins and other more mystical Eastern groups, not just the Orthodox groups, but far more occult groups. So there was this idea that they've picked up those rituals, those initiations, because they would have been in contact with those people. The Knights Templar were accused of worshipping a severed head, and one of the assassin rituals was to introduce an acolyte to a person who'd been buried up to their neck. The initiate would ask the question, and the head would speak to them. And then they would be taken out of the room, and the person in the ground would be lifted out, and they would have their head severed and put on a plate. And this would then be shown to the person as they continued around their ritual to show that the head wasn't attached to the body.
When the Templars were in the East, I mean, what better place than to become acquainted with pre-Christian beliefs? And a lot of these beliefs and practices in the temples of the East would have been far more comfortable with celebrating the body, the naked body, even the sexual acts as part of their rituals. So I think when the Templars came back, who knows, that they incorporated some of these pagan beliefs, some of these pagan rituals into what they were doing.
the rituals that the Templars were engaging in actually, because of their pagan origin, predated the Christianity that they were actually fighting for. So it's perhaps not as surprising or indeed as subversive as one may think, because the things they were doing were perhaps more real to them than this newfound religion, which they were, supposed to be preaching, which was Christianity.
Now, according to their accusers, the Knights Templar used to secretly meet to perform all manner of rituals and ceremonies. Now, the implications are that, far from being a Christian organisation, they were in fact involved in the occult and black magic. They were accused of worshipping a demonic figure called Baphomet, spitting and urinating on an upturned cross, and indulging in all kinds of bizarre sexual practices. Now, there's no proof, but here at Gisors Castle is one site where they were accused of doing all that.
They were required in an initiation to spit or trample or urinate on the cross. And also, they were required to venerate a head, which took various forms, but mainly a bearded severed head. They did it because the inner circle, not your average knight and not your average member of the order, but the inner circle were not what you might call Christians at all.
It's probably true that the Templars did have a secret ritual whereby any new knight, when he joined, was asked to deny Christ and to spit on a crucifix or an image of Christ. Now, for a religious order that was part of the Catholic Church that defended Christendom, that's extraordinary, and we don't see that anywhere else in the medieval period.
It's often said about the Templars that they have these initiation ceremonies that in themselves are incredibly anti-Christian and indeed are positively satanic. All sorts of profane, very, very diabolical practices that the Templars are meant to take part in. They did have initiation rites that were secret. And of course, once you have a secret initiation ceremony, that allows anybody with a relatively lurid imagination to just, place that on there and go, well, I think that's what's happening.
I don't think that there was any form of cult or demon worship or anything like that to do with them. They were supposedly the poor knights of Christ, and I believe that they were good Christians. But I also believe that they were probably thieves and robbers as well. And when you could say some people, when they believed in God, all they needed to do was put an L in, because really they believed in gold.
The Templars were famously said to have travelled to Jerusalem at the end of the 11th century. Officially, they were there providing protection to travelling pilgrims, but as there were less than 20 of them at the beginning, that seems to me highly unlikely. So what were they there for? Well, the most popular theory amongst some historians is that they were there looking for treasure.
The reason we think the Templars were actually digging into the Temple Mound was the fact that when the temples were excavated, they actually found Templar, not remains so much, but bits of broken spurs or bits of sort of shield or something like that, but that belonged to the Templars. So they were definitely in there at some point.
Talk about covert operations. The Knights Templar was said to go to Jerusalem to protect the pilgrims as they go into the Holy Land. Well, there's hundreds of pilgrims and only a handful of Knights Templar. But in return for this so-called favor, they're given a palace wing that's right on top of Solomon's temple. And this is the real reason they're there. They're on a relic quest.
They offer their services for protecting pilgrims. They go to the Patriarch and they're given the Al-Aqsa Mosque. We don't hear anything more about them actually protecting pilgrims. What we do hear a lot more about them is digging tunnels under the Al-Aqsa Mosque looking for something, and there are hundreds of tunnels under the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which they, of course, believed was the Temple of Solomon.
According to legend, Solomon had a multitude of treasures. He had a huge amount of gold, a huge amount of various different treasures, including things like the Ark of the Covenant. The Holy Grail, whatever that is, they possibly had hold of that. And there's a whole bunch of artifacts that had a kind of religious, magical property that they were looking for.
These things, true or false, they of course believed in it in those days, and they would have been worth millions today. And if they found them, as some people believe they did, they could become very rich. Oh, and they did become very rich.
I mean, it certainly looks questionable, given that within 10 years, there's hundreds of knights. They're already spreading out across Europe. It's incredible growth, incredible wealth, very short period of time. I cannot believe that that happened from just offering a kind of glorified medieval security guard service on the road to Jerusalem.
The Knights Templar were extremely wealthy. They created the first World Bank. Where does this money come from? I submit to you, it comes from what they found in Jerusalem. They probably found the gold that was listed in the copper scrolls for a start, but they also found other relics, maybe the Ark of the Covenant, maybe the menorah, other objects from Solomon's temple. That's where I think their money came from.
They found what they were looking for, treasure. Gold, silver, which gave them the start of the whole thing. They then became rich, and they then started lending money. They also created the first checks. So there was a chap leaving England, daren't take his money with him because he would probably be robbed on the way. So they'd issue him a check, and he could actually, when he got to Jerusalem, he could then hand in his check for cash that they'd got. And of course, they charged him interest on it. If, in the meantime, he died while he was in the Crusades, his land, his property, his castle even, may well have been held in security by the Templars, and then they would have taken his land.
And of course, that just snowballs for them in a very virtuous way, to the point in which the Templars control 9,000 estates throughout Europe, which is an enormous amount of land. And of course, once you're controlling that amount of land, you have an enormous income. That's what gives the Templars wealth and influence, and it's not some secret discovery. I'm sorry to be boring.
One of the most famous Templar commanderies or headquarters outside of Paris was here, hidden away in a small street just off Fleet Street in central London, and the clue is in the name, Temple.
aren't that many Templar sites left in the world that you could still go and really experience what it must have been like to be a Templar. But we're standing in one of them. This is the Temple Church in the heart of London. And here in 1185, the Templars opened this building to the public. And they had the Patriarch of Jerusalem come and open it for them, which is why it's round, because it's supposed to symbolize the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which is where all Crusaders had to go when they first arrived in the Holy Land to say a prayer in the Holy Sepulchre, and then they'd discharge their pilgrimage vow. So here we still get a sense of that. And this is largely undamaged. The chancel that was built here was also built by the Templars, but this was in 1240, so a little bit later, because King Henry III wanted to be buried here. But in this round chapel, you still get a sense of what it meant to be a Templar in the medieval period. But you have to use your imagination to recreate the stables, the castle, the dormitories, the refectories, the treasury, where they kept the treasury of the King of England, all of which would have been around here in this area we now call Temple in London.
When they first started, they were the coolest organisation for young men to join. To be Templar was just the most amazing thing. So they were, all the rich young men were just queuing up to join, and of course then handing over their money. One of the rules was when you joined the Knights Templar, you had to give them all your money, all your possessions, all your property. So without really trying, they had all this wealth.
It snowballed big time. A lot of people joined in. And of course, they became international bankers, industrialists. They had their own fleets. They had their own farms. They built huge cathedrals. They became probably some of the wealthiest people in the world.
I guess the big question is, did they find any treasure in Jerusalem? And if so, what was it?
In terms of the Templars' treasure, one has to look at a real level and a symbolic level. Did they dig and find anything and bring it back and make themselves super wealthy? There's no evidence of that at all. All their wealth can be readily explained. There's lots of documentation, charters, bills of exchange. People have been through all this. We know where their wealth came from. But symbolically, did they bring something back? Yes, very definitely. They were born in the Holy Land, and they brought back that different culture into Europe. And that was a culture that was more at ease with the East, that was more at ease with Islam. There are plenty of stories of them learning Arabic, having friends amongst the Islamic leaders. So that was something new for Europe, and that is something they brought back. And to some people, that could be seen as a treasure.
I think it's likely that they found earlier documents that were more accurate about Christianity. I don't think they completely went Islamic or pagan. I think they remained a certain amount of Christianity, but a much more Gnostic version of Christianity, a much more mystical version. I think they may have come across alternative scriptures, alternative gospels, earlier gospels, because a lot of things we see in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we see echoed down through Freemasonry towards the Middle Ages, which points to the Templars as a source.
What the Templars came back with from the East wasn't things, it was ideas. And you've got to remember that part of the world has always been a ferment of ideas. It's where, after all, Christianity, Judaism, Islam began. So it's entirely likely that they were influenced by earlier forms of Christianity, or by scientific Islam, or by Judaism, or by Sufism. There's a whole array of things that they may have been influenced by. We know at the time that people wrote about people who went out to Jerusalem going native. And so it's entirely possible that in a kind of an intellectual sense and a spiritual sense that the Templars went native and came back with ideas that were completely unpalatable to Western Europe.
they found something that actually went back far before Christianity, going back possibly 4,000 years, paganism. And I think what they found may well have inspired them to actually be enacting some of the pagan rituals that they found more convincing than Christianity. Perhaps they found the true meaning of religion, the true meaning of life.
The Quran states that Jesus didn't die on the cross. In the West, it's only just becoming an idea that maybe he didn't die on the cross. In the Bible, there's a certain amount of evidence that says, well, they didn't break his legs, he wasn't up there long enough to die. And he's walking around afterwards with physical wounds that people are touching. So it may be that the Templars came back and thought, the crucifixion didn't happen. We know better. And once you learn that, you can't unlearn it. So if they found earlier documents and they were given rituals or information that had any kind of power, that did anything, it was more valuable to what they'd found in Christianity.
We tend to have a very uniform view of what Christianity means, but if you actually trace it back over all the different periods, there have been many different groups of people who called themselves Christians. In the early days, there were the Gnostics, who had some very strange rites that we wouldn't think of as Christian today. And in the medieval period, of course, there were the Cathars, at the same time as the Templars, who again had another interpretation. So yes, the Templars were Christians, and yes, they would have seen themselves as Christians, but there's no doubt that there were some elements of their practice which were not mainstream Christianity.
All praise Baphomet.
All praise Baphomet.
The most pertinent thing about this heretical approach is that there's no place for a pope, there's no place for bishops, there's no place for priests. This is them and their relationship with the divine, however they want to express it in a very bodily, in a very physical way. And that's completely anathema to the Catholic Church. And maybe what the Templars were doing was going back to a pre-Christian approach to rejoicing in the physical and its relationship with the divine.
In fact, they may well have found something, some scrolls, some documents of some sort, that actually disproves the whole of Christianity and actually proves that there is something bigger and greater that's been going on for thousands of years. And I'm afraid the church, being totally money-minded, they didn't want this to come out. And so you had to shut up. And they didn't shut up, so they had to be shut down.
What Philip of France does, he tries to get money from the Templars, and they deny it. And because he's the King of France, he says, right, I am going to wind this order up. They're too powerful, they're denying me what I want. And, he goes to the Pope and gets a papal bull issued that effectively will wind up the Templars.
King Philip owed the Templars a phenomenal amount of money. And the best way he could get out of paying them back was to invent dreadful things about them and have them done away with. He said that they were blasphemous, they were conducting homosexual acts, they were urinating on the cross, they were worshipping a pagan deity called Baphomet.
In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
There are all kinds of rumours that tend to circulate around the Knights Templar of their involvement in things like satanic worship and black magic and the occult. Do you think there's any truth in those rumours?
Probably not. because the Templar had a lot of enemies. They were very powerful, and one of these enemies was the King of France. He needed money, and he wanted to attack the Templar, so he spread a lot of rumor.
Do you think the King of France may have imprisoned the Knights Templars here at the castle?
Yes, like every prison in France, the castle of Gisors had Templar prisoner, Jacques de Molay and others.
The French king brought 127 different allegations against them, and that included blasphemy, denying Christ, obscenity and homosexuality, and idol worship. And it's the idol worship that people have seized on as being devil worship. Some of the knights did confess to having worshipped an idol in the form of a head or a cat.
If we believe the confessions, there's a huge amount that they're accused of doing weird rituals of worshipping the devil and sacrificing and weird sexual rituals that go on.
When the Knights Templar are arrested in 1307, you ask yourself, who benefits? Well, those who owed them money, clearly the King of France, Rome, lots of people owed them money. But was there another reason? You know, they left Jerusalem so abruptly, as though they found something incredible. Was there something more than just the material that they discovered? That's what I wonder. And is that what they were trying to suppress when they shut them down?
I think the thing that shocked people is the severity with which the king and his forces went after the Templars. Now, superficially, yes, it all comes down to King Philip's debts, he needed the money, etc. But you have to say, on the scale that it happened, is there something else about the Templars? Is there something about their belief system, about their practices, about the threat that they pose to authority, to the church, and to the monarchy as well, to the medieval world?
When they threw open the doors of the Templar headquarters and at Gisors and the castles, all these places had crypts, they all had areas, but they found them empty. They found there's no money. It had all been moved, it had all been secreted away, so it had gone.
The accounts of the time is that the Templars actually managed to make a run for it with a lot of their wealth to the port of La Rochelle, and their wealth was never seen again. When the king's men turned up at the Paris Temple, the wealth that the king had seen on a previous occasion had simply vanished into thin air. And of course, the stories go that that wealth was then taken to Britain, ultimately to Scotland, and maybe onto the New World.
The Templars were a massive society, and they were a secret society, which meant they had sort of a finger in every pie, in every court, in every land. So when the order comes through to arrest them, it's a distinct possibility they'd already heard about it. And therefore, if they had some treasure, they could have squirreled it away somewhere, hidden it in various different strongholds. So the Templar treasure was spread out all over the known world at the time. It wasn't necessarily just in one place.
Because nothing was found, the conspiracy theorists will go, aha, but did you not know that there are all these fleets of Templars ships that were, escaping to islands and places all over the world with treasure? These stories repeat themselves all the time. There's no truth to it at all. They were wound up, their estates and money were confiscated, end of.
equally plausible reasons why they were shut down. One, a lot of important people owed them money. Two, they had found relics and information that was heretical, i.e. not what the church was marching to. So they wanted that information taken away. Information about the true origins of Christianity. It was information that was threatening and information that they were using for their own spirituality. Maybe those rituals that look really dark weren't. Maybe that was their understanding of who the true God really was from these ancient texts they discovered.
There was something about the Templars. They posed a threat to the king. The king was frightened that they had the resources to maybe set up their own kingdom within France. And the church clearly had issues with the Templars. Was there something that the Templars knew? Was there something that they'd learnt in Jerusalem that posed a threat to ecclesiastical authority? Whatever it was, they were wiped off the face of the earth in a very short period of time.
If you look at the Templars today, they've become something of a legend. The mythology, the glamour, I think, around them is something that has lasted, far longer than their reign.
The Templars were incredibly important in history. They really are pretty much the source of all Western secret societies. The Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, the modern Templar orders, you can trace them all back to the Knights Templar. The first real swathe of alternative history coming through from the Holy Land, from the Near East, coming into Europe, starting to permeate European ideals, European culture, art, everything. It all goes back to the Templars. It all comes from them.
The Knights Templar are a real enigma of history. They might have only lasted just over 200 years, but their presence survives to this day, with hundreds of Templar societies around the world, all proudly, if, let's face it, slightly erroneously, claiming their origins back to those original French knights who set off for the Holy Land. So what, if anything, did they find under Jerusalem all those years ago? Well, the fact is, no one really knows for sure, but they were said to have brought a small fortune in gold and treasures back to their various commanderies in Europe, including here at Gisors. It's ironic then that when the order went out on Friday the 13th, 1307, to arrest them all and take their goods and chattels, nothing was ever found. In his bestseller, Foucault's Pendulum, the late writer and historian Umberto Eco wrote a fascinating postscript to the Templars. The order has never ceased to exist, not for a moment. And if the name of the true Grand Master remains a mystery today, an impenetrable secret known only to the truly enlightened, it is because the hour of the order has not struck and the time is not yet ripe. I'll see you next time.